Welcome to All Basket Hangout. I'm Geralf and this is Vandil. And today we're talking about game difficulties.
Or more like difficulty settings or difficulty modes in games.
Yes,
not the difficulty of playing the games.
Or making games or anything like that. But
yeah.
Difficulty settings in games. Yes.
As you can see, we have a representation here. That's the good old easy mode. Then there's this normal mode. That's what you're usually supposed to select if you want the real experience. And then there's the hard mode.
Yeah.
Neatly as little owls there.
That's actually interesting in that normal mode is one that you're supposed to be using, but I remember there's quite a few games that actually have the hard mode or the mode whatever they call it that's after the normal mode. That's what they say, that this is what you're supposed to use if you want to experience the game as it was meant to be played.
Yeah, maybe the older games were more like that. Maybe it's the same thing as in clothes size stuff, that they've moved the benchmark for what is accepted difficulty for a game.
Yeah.
Like with cloth sizes, they change it because people don't want to wear clothes that have a big number or something like that. But that's nice analogy there. Yeah. But
and I remember, like, I've mentioned the Toho games every now and then, and in that game, if you want to experience the entire storyline, then you have to play on the very hardest difficulty, which is called Lunatic. So
yeah, there's usually some insanity mode or something beyond hard.
Yeah.
Less so beyond easy.
Yeah.
Maybe I've seen a very easy somewhere, but yeah, this is the basic or the classic setup, having 3 difficulty modes.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's pretty common to have this hard mode locked up until you clear the game once, and then you can start, or it's the nightmare mode or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. A lot of games do it differently, and we're gonna discuss about those.
So first of all, the fundamental problem, of course, is that when you're creating a game, you can, I guess, the de facto or default what you're going to use, or what a lot of games used to do and what they still do, is that you just make the game and you do a little bit of Q&A, of course, and you try to see that the game isn't too hard or too difficult, and that's it. That's the only setting that the game has. There's no alternative settings. Then there's the option of, offering the player all sort of different options, but the problem there is, of course, that when you start the game, you don't necessarily know.
Yeah, because many games, even nowadays, they first thing in the start of the game, they ask what difficulty you want your game before you even played the game. And that's one major part I think we wanted to discuss, this asking something of your player first thing in the gameplay session.
Yeah, before you even have any idea what the game is all about. Or
sometimes they try to put some kind of description of what you should be expecting from the said difficulty, but it's not very ideal, especially if you're not very familiar with the genre or the game franchise you're starting to play, or maybe it's a brand new game franchise there's nothing to compare it to. And how do you know what is your level?
Yeah, and so in that sense, of course, if you're going to give this option of, choosing your difficulty level, then I think it's always better to have some description. But of course, this whole system of offering that difficulty level, I don't think it's almost never the best way to handle that. But I guess there's a lot of different games that do handle this difficulty setting in different kind of ways, and we're going to be discussing them, of course. But for example, there's games that sort of they don't give you the option, they just try to deduce your skill level from how you play the game and then either give you upgrades or extra lives or whatever during the gameplay. And of course, even that system, it may seem like an obvious upgrade to trying to choose something for yourself, but then again, those games do have their own problems as well. And, well, we'll see about them in the future. But back to this system, so in this case, I think the worst case is when you just, well, I don't know if it's worse if there's absolutely no difficulty options at all compared to giving you some sort of leeway, or because usually I think I personally prefer that there's no difficulty choosing at all. Well, I guess part of it is that, you know, we do play games quite a bit, and if you have somebody who doesn't play games all that much, they may want to try something a little less difficult. But for us, we usually want to experience, or not experience, but just play the game like it's meant to be played, and it feels somewhat silly, I guess, to be playing it and then knowing that there's some, you know, harder or easier difficulty, and especially if you're locked to that setting once you choose it. So that's, I guess, would be an immediate upgrade if you can start the game with whatever difficulty setting and you can change that later if you feel that the game is way too easy for you and it doesn't feel satisfying.
Yeah, but we come to the point where I want to ask, why is there difficulty settings at all in games? And I think it's all about widening your audience.
Yeah.
Trying to get as wide an audience to play your game as possible and give them a few options that make it easier for them to try it out or be willing to try it out without feeling like they're being pandered.
Yeah.
Or feeling that they're gonna have a hard time. I'm reminded of old Mario games. Someone somewhere said that old Mario games, the difficulty comes from how much you are desiring to accomplish in those games. Because in Super Mario World, there's these secret stages.
There's the whole sort of star-shaped world in there, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, and all those secret giant buttons you can find somewhere and push that and get a new place. All those optional stuff, you don't have to get those to clear the game. And that's, someone has argued, is one of the better ways to give kind of difficulty settings in a way in a game, in the gameplay mechanic itself. You can clear the game with your brains nailed into the wall. I don't know, that's a Finnish saying, I don't know what's how could you say, but you can clear it, you can clear the stages and clear the game pretty easily if you want to. But if you want to 100%, let's say Super Mario World, you have to start becoming better at it. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
You have to start caring about exploring each level and try to find these secrets or master new techniques, how to jump somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that's that's also part of this difficulty setting discussion.
Yeah.
How you could implement inside a game without asking your player what your level is.
Yeah, so that's one way of basically implementing the whole difficulty setting in your game, in that the playing through the basic game is easy enough for anybody, and then there's extra challenges.
Easy to clear, hard to master.
Yeah, but there's obviously that system has its own drawbacks as well, in that maybe, or basically, if instead there was this difficulty setting, then you could play through the entire game and all the challenges. It feels like you could complete the entirety of the game by having some difficulty setting that's familiar to you, but now instead maybe there's some challenges that you can't just accomplish because they're just too difficult for you. So that's sort of the downside of it. And of course, for some players it may feel like the main game is too sort of easy or whatever. So that's the downside of it. But I do personally think that I kind of like that. We've been playing through Kirby and the Forgotten Land recently, and I mean it's a pretty easy game, but it is also following this formula in that there are optional challenges and extra challenges and time trials and whatever for those who want to challenge themselves, push themselves a little further. And I'd like to return back to a previous point that you had, which was that why are the difficulties options made? They are to widen the audience. But it's also interesting that if you look at all the like the games that sell the best, if you look at like Mario series and Legend of Zelda and Grand Theft Autos and Call of Duties and so on, none of those games have difficulty settings. Right.
Why are you talking about Call of Duty? Because
does it have?
I think at least the older ones had.
Okay.
Because Fraser played some of the Call of Duty games, and that was one of the examples I had in my head. Because they ask for your. But I don't know if it's modern on the modern Call of Duties, and I'm not an expert on it, but I have this inkling of seeing such a setting.
Yeah.
In the beginning, so I'm.
Yeah, but that was just one of the examples. So if you consider all the other, like super famous game series, they like it doesn't feel like it's from a game developer's side. Of course, you're looking at it like we can get more options for players, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's something that would actually bring in more players. And at the same time, it's not really something that, nobody looks at the game and then looks at the package for is there an option for me to play easy mode, unless you're, maybe there are some people who are handicapped and they're looking for specialized, like, controls for whatever you're handicapped with, even if it's just like a red-green color mode or red-green blindness color mode or something like that. But other than that, it doesn't feel like something that you would put in the back of the box to advertise your game, that hey, you can choose your difficulty. Of course, some games do advertise that you can play as you want, and I guess that's sort of playing the same or trying to say the same thing, but in that case usually the difficulty is based on the fact that you can play through the game in multiple different ways. You don't necessarily have to get really good at platforming or whatever. You can talk your way through the game or use some other methods.
Yeah, you're now reminding of the kind of maybe it's the reason why difficulty settings are existing in the first place, but you could see it as a branch, this inclusivity aspect. It's kind of a difficulty settings, but there are games like Last of Us 2 and was it Horizon also. Some big games have come out with these settings that allow you to make it so that impaired people can enjoy the game. And those are, you can say those are kind of, they are difficulty settings. They are taking unnecessary sounds away, or they are start giving text cues or visual cues instead of sound cues for stuff. And that's, I think, one of the best approaches games have taken this difficulty setting, going to the inclusivity route, not being about is it hard or difficult or easy to play, but are you able to play whether or not you have some disability.
Yeah. I also think that that's one of the best ways to implement that. Of course, it takes a lot more effort to sort of allow you to tweak these different kind of things to your liking. But I do think that that's the best way. Of course, I'm red-green colorblind myself, and it's really nice if you can, especially in games like Splatoon, you can choose modes that help you deal with that sort of thing. And in other cases, I guess it would be really nice if they would include that sort of settings for things that we usually consider as difficulty settings, in that allowing you to basically tweak the amount of damage you're taking or dealing or whatever. Of course, it does take away, the drawback is that it does take away from some of the immersion in the game, because now you're tweaking things like that. But I think that Diablo 3 did this somewhat well, in the sense that sort of if you feel like the game is becoming too easy, then you can just ramp up the difficulty a little bit, and you can continue to play, and if it's still too easy, you can still ramp up the difficulty. So it's the problem, I think, there is that it's not really a slider. It's more like there's, instead of having like easy, normal and hard, there's like hard +1 and hard +2 and hard +3 and hard +4. I don't remember what they're actually called. They're called something like Hellfire mode or whatever, but it has a lot of like modes, and you can just ramp it up. I guess it would be more, instead of having so many options, you could just have a slider or something instead. But the basic idea, I think, is very good, because you can play the game, and if it just feels too easy, then you can keep ramping up the difficulty. So as long as you understand as a player, the game will feel satisfactory for you, and it won't feel too hard and it won't feel too difficult.
Yeah, but I think Diablos have established themselves kind of a PC gamer centric games, because they are on the PC.
Yeah.
And PC gamers mostly are very accustomed to having these settings, and they are more willing to, or they are more geared up mentally to accept these kinds of data and tweaking that data or settings for you.
Yeah.
But when you start to go to the console side, you are more faced with regular people who may not be playing games a lot and are willing to have these settings or want to dive into settings.
Yeah.
So there's also this aspect for what your audience will be. Are they those who know absolutely certainly what they want and are expecting to have this kind of slider, or are or is your audience gonna be those who don't even know what easy mode is or normal mode is, what it's compared to? And there's this audience aspect, of course. So it really depends on the game and who you're gonna try to appeal to with your game.
Yeah. And even though that has changed somewhat in the recent years, I remember this one guy lamenting the fact that, like in the old days, like 30 or 40 years ago, you had to be pretty intelligent to play computer games at all. And if you were installing like any PC game, then it wasn't just about running some installation wizard. You actually had to know what sound card you have. You had to know what graphics card you had to know, well, you had to be basically ready to tweak all sort of different kind of settings to make the game run good enough for yourself. But despite that, even today, computer games do tend to have a lot more settings to deal with. There's all sort of shader sliders and shader types, and you have all these graphical options for a lot of different things like shadow qualities and water quality and whatever. So even there, yes, computer games do have all sort of stuff that you have to tweak, and in that sense it can feel a lot more normal for any PC gamer to have that mentality that, okay, I'm going to have to do some tweaking or make some decisions even before I start gaming, and maybe start the game and see how they work, and I may have to restart the game a couple of times here and there to make sure that it runs smoothly and looks as good as possible.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, these difficulty settings, they're about the game tweaking numbers behind the scenes for you. It might be that they increase the health of the enemies. That's one of the easier ways to make game more difficult or more easier for the player. But that runs into problem of having these bullet sponges that take a lot of hits before dying, and is that really satisfactory gameplay having this kind of difficulty?
Yeah.
But it's all about tweaking those numbers, how intelligent the enemy AI will be, how fast they are, or how powerful you will be, how many items or how frequently the game spawns items for you.
Yeah. So that's all about the question of how do you implement different difficulty settings. And yeah, there's a lot of options there. And of course, in some cases, as you mentioned, if it's just like the health of enemies, some of those decisions can even like make the game feel a lot worse. If it's just making the enemies have more health. So let's say you play the game on normal and then you decide that, okay, I want to try the hard mode, and it's just the same, but the bosses just have a lot more health. So at that point you're sort of seeing the patterns of the boss repeat themselves over and over and over again, instead of getting any sort of extra challenge actually there.
Yeah, the difficulty setting is a very hard beast for the game developer, but also for the player. If game developer they decide to ask the player themselves what they want. Do they want the easy mode or the normal mode? It's already a little accomplishment to give you these 3 options instead of giving you this patch of sliders to adjust for yourself. Someone might enjoy that, but most of people just want to start playing the game, so they start to make it easier by giving these 2 options that are worded somehow that you can get the gist of what you can expect from those settings.
Yeah. And one problem I see there is that, as we mentioned, if it's done badly, then it can actually hinder the gameplay. So even if it's just like 2 options, like let's say they're not even called easy and normal, it's just, there's some option that clearly says that if you just want to experience the story, then choose this.
Yeah.
And then there's, if you actually want to play the game and experience some challenge, then choose this. And that sounds really good, right? But if the game designers or the game makers have done a poor job of it, then the easy mode may just feel really unsatisfying, even for those people who only think that, I only want to experience the story. So that's sort of the problem there. But if it's done really well, then of course it can also be satisfying.
It's all about how much resources and time you're gonna have to implement that, those options for your player.
Implement and of course test and try out and everything, see if that they work.
I've done a lot of web development or designed a lot of websites, and from that experience I understand how easy it is to just design something inside this frame and make it, design it in a frame sort of, and not be bothered by any of these variables. In web design, you nowadays have to think about mobile size. Not back in the day, you could just think of the computer screen size and that's it. But nowadays, you have to take into account that people can read your web page like this, or like this, or like this, or like this.
Yeah.
And it's that same mentality is what can be applied to game difficulties. That what do you want to take into account for your player? And it really depends on, of course, the genre of the game. Because if you make a Picross game or Sudoku game, the difficulty in those kinds of games is different. It's about that how much hints you give in the game board, or how many numbers there are placed in Sudoku games for you, and how much they let you to solve for yourself. But when you start going to more complex games, like a platformer, then you have to start thinking about how much enemies might hit you and how much your player might hit your enemies. And even more complex, maybe RPGs are in the most complex part of the scale, where there are lots of numbers. There are defend, attack, speed, dexterity, all these variables. It's all about those numbers, and there's a lot of numbers to tweak for a difficulty settings. Well, of course, RPGs, I don't recall any RPG that has difficulty settings, because the difficulty in those games, it comes from how much you are willing to grind, essentially, how much you're willing to level up your characters and buy them gear and all that, tweak your numbers for your benefit.
Yeah, so of course it depends on the RPG, but especially in the JRPG genre. Indeed, it's leveling up, and you're in a new area, or you come by a boss that you can't beat, so that means, okay, let's go to the last save and let's level up some more here, and then go try the boss again, and now you can do it. But in older Western RPGs, leveling wasn't always in the same way like an option. In some cases, the game might have been somewhat linear in that you only had like a limited amount of, or limited chances of actually fighting against enemies, and that also meant that maybe your character didn't get all that much stronger in some cases, and it might have also meant that part of understanding how the game works is, or part of the difficulty is understanding how the game works, and you need to sort of maximize those numbers. And even we mentioned Diablo 3, but in Diablo 2, that game doesn't really give you the option of resetting your, or there was at some point a patch in Diablo 2 where you can reset your character's skills and abilities and stats once. But as far as I understood, that's it. But in the original game especially, you couldn't reset your... So if you were playing in Amazon and you were putting your skill points on intelligence, then you were just wasting all of those points. Or like there wasn't any caps on, or maybe there was some cap, but for the most part, if you look at your talent trees, you could put like almost as many points as you wanted on some of the first skills that you see there, and then basically there's all these better skills at the later in the talent tree, and now you didn't have any points for those, and that first skill there, that would just be super powerful, but maybe it wasn't something you'd like to use anymore. Maybe it was something like a poison arrow, and now you're in an area where everything is immune to poison or whatever, and it doesn't really work as well. So now you're sort of screwed, and you maybe need to start the whole game over again. So knowing where to put those points was sort of part of the difficulty in the game in some cases. And there's one RPG I remember, I tried it for a little bit, I think it was Arcanum Steamworks, something like that was the name of the game. And I started the game, and I don't even remember for sure, but I think you have to put stats on your character, and I didn't know what any of those do. And once I had made the character, I started running somewhere, and I'm pretty sure I was going to the right direction, and there were some wolves in the way, and I started fighting, and I couldn't hit the wolves at all. And I think I tried it again and again and again, many times over, and for whatever reason I put my stats in a way, or I didn't put stats in anything that would have made me actually able to hit those enemies. Because they weren't like killing me with one blow or anything either. They were clearly enemies that I would assume be able to fight at that point, but I wasn't, because I wasn't hitting at all. I could try to hit them like 100 or even 200 times, and none of those hit. So really a part of the game is knowing what those stats do and where you need to put them and whatever. Well, I guess that's sort of part of the charm of some of those games, but for the most part, I don't personally really like that aspect of having those numbers mean so much in that game that you just can't do something really basic that you're supposed to be able to do. Like there's Western RPGs that are really difficult, like the Ultima games in some sense, but at the other sense, basically you can't do your character so wrong that they couldn't be able to hit anybody or defeat anything in combat.
There are many ways to approach this. It doesn't necessarily have to be this question with 3 options and you have to choose one. It might also be you just start your game, and there's the difficulty in, as you said, in having this willingness to do your research before starting to play your game, and getting to know what stats are important in the beginning. Because I started to think your description actually sounded like the game makers might have been thinking about giving this enemy that in the very beginning tells you if you are starting wrong or
yeah, that could actually
right.
But that could actually be it.
But that's kind of a passive-aggressive way of doing it, having these enemies that you can defeat, and the game isn't just telling you anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of playing pranks on you and not telling you what you're doing wrong. But that might be that they've been thinking about this, that they have made this system and they want to give an idea about the system for the player first hand with the first enemies. And that's one way to approach it, having player face enemies that show you if you made a good decision at the start or not.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point that you put up, because if you think about it from that sense, in one sense I do like that, as I've mentioned in some of the previous videos, that I think it's very important for a game to establish itself in the very start. Like if you look at some game like Blasphemous or Dark Devotion, then those are games that sort of, basically when you start Dark Devotion, and you go to the dungeon, one of the first things that happens is that you take a few steps forward, and immediately there's a spike that hits you from the bottom. So it immediately tells you that, this is a game where you're going to get screwed up. And you need to be, aware of everything and don't trust anything or anybody, and be careful at all times because this is serious. But at the same time, like if you look at like Ultima 4, you played a little bit of Ultima 4, and that's a game that it doesn't let you tweak the numbers. What it does is that in the start of the game, you come by this sort of personality questionnaire, and you get asked a series of questions about virtues and situations relating to them. And according to those questions, depending on how you answer them, you end up with one of the virtues. And depending on what virtue you end up with, you end up starting with a certain class and in the certain part of the world, so to speak. And if you look at it from the point of, the game is telling you whether you chose well or not, then in Ultima 4, if you get humility, then you're pretty quickly going to think that, okay, I think I chose poorly, because you start next to a town that it's full of poisonous swamp. If you walk on those, you get poisoned, and you don't have any like cure spells at that point, so you're going to die pretty quickly. And it's on an island, so there's no enemies to fight, there's nothing to do, and humility means that you start as a shepherd, so your stats aren't very good. It's basically sort of choosing the hard mode without knowing that you actually did. And of course, it doesn't mean that you can't finish the game. It's just the start is going to be a little bit more difficult than for some other classes. But it may be like just looking at the surroundings of what you can do and what you think you can do. It may make you feel like, okay, the game is obviously telling me that I did something wrong immediately in the start. So in that sense, I guess it doesn't always work, that sort of idea.
That's a very interesting to not give players these stats and how much do you want to spend on each stat, but giving this questionnaire, it feels very nice. But the results are something that you don't necessarily connect to each other. How do you know what is a good? Maybe if you end up as a shepherd, and that gives the impression of the game, okay, this is what it's gonna be, and you're not aware that becoming honorable might be a better start. Or
much easier start, definitely. Like especially in Ultima 4, if you choose honor as or you end up choosing honor as by that questionnaire, then you basically have the strongest class in the game. But of course, even if you're playing Ultima 4 and you know what you're doing, you can choose Shepherd or whatever other class, and you can just go recruit the person that represents honor and is a paladin as soon as you basically get to the rest of the game. But
this Ultima 4's questionnaire really is an example of this challenge of making this difficulty setting something that's easy to grasp as a player who has not probably seen your game. As a game maker, you know what your game is made of, you know it inside out, but the player themselves, they don't understand what numbers are running there in the background for them to get to play the game. How do you translate this difficulty setting into words or into a concept that people can really understand and have a ability to make a choice, informed choice? That's a very challenging to make it, because it's very easy to put just a number sliders there and call it a day. But when you start to make it more usable for the end user, who is going to be the player, then you have to have this whole process of making it something more understandable.
Yeah. So the questionnaire that's used in Ultima 4, it's also used in 5 and 6, and I think, yeah, Ultima 9 as well. So I've always found that really fascinating and very interesting, but I think it does a very poor job as a sort of difficulty choosing option. And I also don't think, while I think that it's very interesting, I do think that looking at it from our modern or from our modern viewpoint, it's not, or it could be used a lot better. Like in this case, if you end up with a shepherd, it's in all of the Ultima games, it's always something theoretically bad. It always means that your character is weaker than any other option. Whereas if you'd make a modern game like that, then you would probably have something like the shepherd would probably have a little more like a speech ability or something like because the questionnaire is all about what kind of things do you appreciate in life and what is sort of the virtue that you embody the most. And if you end up with humility, then that means that you chose options that basically means that you're content with not having all that much in your life and not getting so much glory and whatever. And it also means that you're probably better off with dealing stuff in a sort of non-lethal way. You don't want to solve things by fighting, you want to solve things by understanding and appreciation and stuff like that. But those games, Ultima games, they don't really have options like that. You're still going to, the storylines is still going to be the same, so you're going to end up fighting the same monsters and whatever. So it doesn't really have like those options to play as an actual shepherd. It just means that you're playing as a character who can't equip all the stuff that everybody else can and doesn't have the same amount of stats to start with.
So those are games centered around attack power and defending power, more or less.
Yeah.
And they don't really well accommodate these different types of strengths people might have, like speech, like you said, and charisma or something that could take them very or make them their lives very good or successful, make them very successful in their lives.
Yeah, even Ultima 4, which is very much about following the virtues, and there's a lot more to virtues than just beating up monsters, but it's still about giving money to the poor and so on. But it doesn't, even if you're a shepherd, it doesn't give you actually any benefits to any of those. You can be a fighter who's much stronger, and you're actually probably be able to give more money to people because now you're able to fight enemies much more easily and so on.
Yeah. And now I think we're going to the unfair territory of these difficulty settings or difficulty modes, because now I'm reminded of some games that they don't tell you are starting to get screwed, like Final Fantasy VIII is something like that.
Yeah.
Until that game, you have been taught that it's good to level up your characters a lot. It's like it's very natural that if you level up your characters, they will fare better against the monsters and the bosses. But this Final Fantasy VIII, it turns this concept. They try to put some spin on it, and what we read or heard before starting the game ourselves was that if you go to that familiar route of leveling up your characters as much as possible during the game, you are essentially screwing yourself over, because the monsters scale up very unfairly.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the problem?
Yeah, so it's the same thing with Final Fantasy VIII and with Oblivion, in that in both of those games, the monsters scale up with you, or they level up with you. So if you level up, then the monsters will level up too. And the problem with both of those games, with Final Fantasy VIII and Elder Scrolls Oblivion, is that most of your character's strengths don't come from leveling up. Or in Oblivion, yes, they do, but in Oblivion, you need to level up your character optimally, or at least somewhat optimally. And you can do a poor job at it if you don't know how the leveling up system works, or if you're putting your points in the wrong places once again. And in Final Fantasy VIII, most of your power comes from, I don't remember the name of the exact things, but you put these sort of magic spells or points into your weapons and stuff like that. So, like, the most optimal way to play Final Fantasy VIII is to basically run away from every fight except from boss battles, because you can't run from those, and then just use those spells to power up your weapons as much as possible, and that sort of gives you huge boost to your all of your stats that you want. And then most of the game you're just spent, draining those spells from the, or I guess there was another word instead of draining, but you're sort of pulling those spells from the enemies and just letting them hit you, and then you're just trying to keep yourself alive while you're pulling those spells from the enemies and then putting them into your weapons, and never using those spells, because if you have 99 of fire spell and you're sort of, okay, I'm putting it to my weapon, and now that gives me a ton of strength. So now if I cast one fire spell, then I'm only going to have 98 fire spells, and that means that my weapon isn't giving as much strength to my character anymore. So it's a completely like ludicrous system. And
the problem about enemy scaling up, that's not a problem. It's a kind of a good way to automatically scale up your game according to the players' success or how they are playing the game. But if you do it poorly, they had some kinds of steps or something like that in Final Fantasy VIII, that if you went over some level, let's say it's level 10, then the enemies go a step higher, and their numbers go way too up for you to be successful anymore. And it just start escalating the more you level up your characters. That's what I understood. So those Oblivion and Final Fantasy VIII are examples of having this kind of automatic difficulty system built inside them, but made very poorly, because you can start screwing yourself over at very beginning of your game, and you're screwing yourself even worse during the hours of gameplay, and you don't realize it until way far in the game.
So you basically, because of what we, as you mentioned, from every single Final Fantasy game before that, leveling up has always made you stronger, so now you're able to fight better. So you may think that, okay, these enemies are starting to get pretty hard, I guess I need to level up more. And so you go and you level up more, and that's it's only making you actually weaker. And it's the same thing with Oblivion, in that you may come by stronger monsters, and now you think, okay, I just need to level up more. And now you start leveling up, and then the next time you come across some bandits, now they're wearing like late game armor, and you're like, what's going on here? Why do I keep, okay, is this just one group of bandits, and you don't, maybe you ignore those because it's just one time, and then you come across another group of bandits, and those guys are wearing some late game armor as well.
Bandits, the outcasts.
Like normal bandits that are supposed to be more or less like the easiest enemy that you just...
Poor people who just steal whatever they can get.
It's like they're wearing all this shiny armor, and they're looking like, okay, those guys are freaking royalty. Are these royal guard or something?
Yeah.
No, they're just regular bandits. It's just that, you know, you're so high level, even though you put all your stats to, I don't know, speech or whatever, and that's why you're so weak that you can now never do very well against the enemies. And for Oblivion, I know there are a lot of mods that basically remove the whole scaling up completely because of that. And I do remember back when I started playing the game, a lot of people told me that, yeah, you should probably have a mod like this because it really helps the game.
So there's a couple of examples of this bad implementation of this automatic difficulty.
Yeah.
But I have a very hard time coming up with games that have a good difficulty system built in that scales up according to your skills, because if it's done well, you won't notice it.
Yeah.
And that's very hard to pinpoint these masterpiece games that do this right, because they are silent. You don't realize that the game is making itself more easier or difficult for you.
Yeah. Best sort of difficulty setting in any game is one that you never realize. I think that's sort of the gist of it.
Yeah, one example we both know is this first Crash Bandicoot game. At least with the boulder levels, was the one or multiple those. This you run away from the boulder, and the more you die in that, the less speed the boulder itself will have in the next times you try the level again.
Yeah,
and that's a very good way to implement this, easing up the difficulty for you if you're not getting through this part in the game.
Yeah, and the other thing that game does is if you're dying a lot, then the game will give you more. I don't remember if it's extra lives or those Aquaku masks or whatever, but the game does like silently give you some upgrades to help you through the game. But the problem or the downside with that kind of system is that it works very well when you don't know about it.
Yes, that's very important. That's why the masters of this are masters, because we don't know they are making this very good system.
But then the problem comes when you go on the internet forums and then people are basically discussing these things, and now you know that they're there, and now you know that, you know, you're actually being pampered or whatever in the game, and it does sort of break the illusion with it. One example I have is the XCOM game, the more modern one that was made sometime during the last 10 years, I guess.
Was it Enemy Within?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, so with that game, basically, I'm not going to spoil the story, but basically I'm going to spoil the game mechanic. Basically, there's a rubber band effect that tries to make the game at some point lose your characters, because the game makers felt like the more of your soldiers die in the alien invasion, so to speak, then the better experience it is for the player. But the problem is, of course, I'm somebody who I really don't want to lose any of my characters. I'm really sort of materialistic in that sense. And at some point it gets so ridiculous that, well, whenever you're targeting at an enemy, it gives you this estimate of how likely you are to hit the enemy. And at some point it gets to the point where if it's not 100%, then all of my shots are going to miss.
And so this is in the case when you're not a single of your characters has died.
Yeah, for like 20 plus game hours.
Yeah.
And so the game is, even though it's showing me that you have a 99% chance of hitting, in reality I have a 0% chance of hitting. It's never going to hit. I can like save and reload and save and reload as many times as I want, it's never going to hit. I always need to move the character to a position where it's always 100% chance of hitting. And in that case, the game can't lie anymore because it's 100%. It has to hit. But sort of the game becomes just ridiculous at that point because it's just doing everything it can to make at least one of my characters die at that point. And once again, it sort of felt like at that point that I'm kind of screwed in that sense that I have like maybe 6 or 7 of these super high made soldiers and then basically nobody else. And the game is trying to kill most of those characters off. And if I let them kill those, then I'm left with these characters that can't deal with these like end game aliens that I'm up against. I can't level up those characters because they just can't do anything.
And they really had a good thinking because it really ups the immersion when you lose some people of your team. It really is this. We've been talking about these games giving you emotions and letting you feel emotions, good ones and bad ones, negative and positive emotions. So they really had a good attempt or good intentions there. But the implementation, it starts to become very artificial. And you start noticing it. Did you know it from the start that it had this kind of background system?
I didn't know it from the start, but at some point it just becomes so apparent. And then later I read some article that solidified that, indeed, there is this something.
You just had this intensely strong desire to preserve your characters. And that kind of let you discover this kind of behind the scenes.
I mean, now that I think about it, I could maybe cheat the system by making some like newbie level
some sacrificial characters.
And then just letting those die, and now the game just decides that okay, you had like 20 characters die. Now I'm going to make sure that even if you have 0 or 1% chance of hitting, now it's going to actually be 100%. But once again, it takes a lot away from the immersion when all the time you're having like a 70 to 99% chance of hitting and every single hit is just missing, and basically at that point the game is just saving every turn and just reloading if you didn't put your character into a position where they have 100% chance of hitting the enemy. So it's sort of ridiculous.
So as you can hear, it's a very hard or narrow path you can tread trying to make this intelligent automatic system that people won't realize. And one other example, did you know that Fortnite, in your first fight, they all are gonna be bots? Because it's a fact that people are more likely to drop the game if they lose their first fight. So in Fortnite, I don't know if it's still applied in the game, but at the beginning at least, you don't know they are bots. They are named some. I guess they have names that feel like real human has made themselves a neat little username for themselves, and they don't tell you they're bots, and it's just for you to win your first fight. So that you have this first step of that sunk cost fallacy and that joy of succeeding first from Fortnite. And that's also an aspect of this difficulty setting, having this automatic first fight with bots. And well, it's not a bad thing, but if you know this and start playing Fortnite, you might be a bit jaded, or do you even want to start the game if you know you're gonna have easy bots against you? That's why you're gonna win the first fight.
And I guess that also goes against what I said that I really like about games, in that the very in the very first start, they sort of established that, yeah, this game is going to be very difficult. And I mean, that is what all battle royale games are, like for Fortnite. They are very difficult games. So you start the game and you very likely win your first match because it's against bots. And after that, now you're going to be playing against enemies that are humans, and they're probably very good at the game. And even if they're not, it's a game where it's very easy to just die very quickly. And I've seen, we haven't played the game ourselves, but I've seen quite a few people play the game, and it's just, even if you're somewhat good at the game, then it's just a couple of seconds that you're just doing something and somebody just shoots you a few times, and you can hardly even react or shoot back at them, and you're just dead, and that's your run. It's time to start another one. And of course, that's the whole point of battle royale games, I guess. But even so, it, like that first game that you're going to have, it doesn't really give you that experience. It just gives you an experience of, oh, there's somebody there and he's shooting at you and missing all the time. Of course, because it's a bot that's supposed to be missing you. And I keep wondering if, like, which is actually better for the player. Is it, giving you the truthful insight that, yeah, this game is going to be hard, so you better prepare your mind for the fact that this game is going to be hard, and if there's somebody around you and they shoot you, then they're going to most likely hit you and they're going to kill you within few seconds. And that would immediately teach you that, okay, so I need to be prepared for that. I need to look around at all the times, and I can't just run to where I run and stay inside houses and keep looking at this body or choosing my loot or whatever for as long as I want. So that's sort of a pretty difficult question, I guess, from the game design perspective, when it comes to teaching your game about teaching the player about how difficult the game is.
Yeah, so as a game developer, you essentially have two options: you can also mix and match, but essentially there's this giving the player an option to choose what they want, or make it an automatic system that scales according to the skills of your player.
Yeah.
Or do both in a balanced way. But there's also the third one. Well, it's not the third one. It's actually very basic essence of a game, ramping up the difficulty the further you get in the game, challenging the player with new aspects of the gameplay that they have to master, throwing new enemies at them, new scenarios or situations, always giving some challenges, and that's also part of this difficulty or mind of making or tweaking this difficulty for your player, giving them these stepping stones towards more harder and becoming more skilled. And that's what makes the gameplay satisfying, getting to succeed over and over again with new challenges. Because without ramping up the difficulty, the game risks itself becoming very dull, and people will just drop it because it's all the same all the time.
And the downside or the challenge with that system is that you either have to build the game in a way where you design it so that you're actually making sure that the player learns something, so that they don't just feel like, okay, for some reason I was barely able to manage through that last level, and now I can't pass through this one, and I have no idea why. So you're ramping up the difficulty, but you're not necessarily telling the player what's wrong. What is it exactly that they need to learn? And
that's a pretty common problem, and this term difficulty spike is a term for this when game becomes too difficult too fast.
Yeah, and even if it's not like a spike, even if it's not actually a spike, it may feel like a spike because you were playing the game fine, just or maybe like for several levels, and now you're having problems, and it's always about does the game do any sort of something to make sure that your skills are scaling up with the game, or at least the fact that it's giving you some reason to continue the game and not just okay, I'm difficult now, good luck. Is there something that like if you look at like the Warriors game series, what those games do is that they just throw so many enemies at you that you just become so good with the basics and you get pretty far with the game and you're sort of invested in it and you're having fun, and maybe if it does get difficult, you actually maybe you are at this state that where you are actually questioning that maybe is there just something I need to learn to make it through, and what is it that I need to learn. And of course, it does also help if you give the player some sort of options to make their characters stronger. Like, well, of course, leveling up is one good way to do that. If you can buy any upgrades for your characters or whatever.
Or choosing between melee or
ranged or magic or whatever. Stuff like that. But even in those cases, like the problem with giving your character or giving you the possibility of making your character stronger is that, especially if the game is going to keep ramping up, then okay, now I made it through that level that I was having trouble with, but it was just because I was brute forcing it and I didn't actually learn anything. And if the game is going to sort of expect that I became good enough to learn something to get through that game, and now it's going to expect that I learn the next step, but I haven't even learned the last step, I just made my character stronger, then that's going to be a ramping up problem even in that scenario. So there are some difficulties with that, and I think that all comes to the fact of discussing about how do you teach your players things, and discussing about tutorials and the problems with tutorials and how you can teach your player without tutorials, and I guess that's a whole different discussion. One way is of course to make those like ramping up the difficulty is to make those that difficulty ramping up into something like an optional challenge. So that's already what you talked about, Super Mario World. That's of course one way. So basically the player is they can play through the basic game campaign, but then there's these optional things that they can do, or maybe they can just try to improve their times to time trials. But there's one more way at least to do that, which is something that I think games like Bayonetta do, which is that the game itself, I actually think Bayonetta probably, I don't remember for sure, but I think it does have difficulty setting. But in addition to that, at the end of every stage you get this trophy, which shows how well you did, so you can sort of play the game not only on a difficulty setting, but also on like you don't have to do perfectly as long as you get through the stage. And then if you want to challenge yourself, you can try for those getting better and better trophies at the end of each stage.
And I understood it also gives a couple of data, how much time you spent and maybe how much damage you took. Something to grab onto what you did wrong and what you might need to improve to get a better trophy.
Yeah. And so I'd really want to talk about that system specifically because on paper it sounds really good. As you mentioned, not only does it give you the option of choosing difficulty setting, but also it gives you this data about, you know, what you need to look out for. Or I'm pretty sure I never looked at any walkthroughs or anything, and I still know that, yeah, it's the time and it's the amount of damage you took. And those are the things that affect the statue. So you get that information somewhere, and you know those are the things that you need to look out for. And despite that, I really hated that. I don't know if it was because it was like, say for example, like as I mentioned, we've been playing Kirby, the Forgotten Land, and in that game there are sort of these extra challenges that have this time trial, and you can sort of try to improve your time, and it even shows you sort of if you get past this time, then you sort of get some extra coins. But I'm sort of fine with that. But in Bayonetta, you're playing to the stage, and you know you take a little bit of damage, and the stages are somewhat long, and they even have bosses and whatever. So it's a pretty long ride from the start to the end, and you need to be really fast, and you need to be making sure it's not enough that you heal or anything. You just can't take any hits, you can't take any damage if you want to get the best trophies. And it just feels really unsatisfying that you make a little bit of a mistake and you take a little bit of damage, and now your run is ruined if you want to get the best trophy. And I imagine that it's really good if your audience is, I guess, I wouldn't even say hardcore gamers, I'd say like a hikikomori type of players who do nothing but play games, and they have nothing in their lives except for improving themselves in this specific game until they've done everything. In that case, I guess a system like this is really good. But other than that, the fact that you get a statue and it's showing you that, yeah, you took one little hit and you took 2 seconds too long in the stage, and that's why you didn't get the platinum trophy, that's why you only got the gold trophy, then it's just, I'd prefer to have the that it just shows you that, yeah, this is the time, and it doesn't show you that, yeah, you're only the 1 millionth player. It just shows you a time, and I can be fine with that. I'm not competing with anybody except for myself. In that sense, I just personally don't really like the system.
But you happen to come across this part of difficulties, having these challenges, and deciding for yourself if you want to pursue those challenges.
Yeah.
In Kirby Forgotten Land, you mentioned these challenge levels. They are these condensed experiences where they give you this specific ability that you are supposed to learn to use in this specific scenario.
Yeah.
And how you have to do at least well enough that you get to the end of the game, the end of the level, and you get this most important thing. It's the crystal that's important for upgrading your ability or abilities, any ability you want. And the extra challenge it's the time challenge. You have to go under certain time and you get extra coins. And that's very nice if you get that little tick there and you get the extra coins, but those coins are so abundant that you can get there anywhere else. And it's not a big deal that you missed that time.
Yeah.
It's not as unsatisfactory to see not getting that tick, because the reward of it isn't that much of a deal.
Yeah.
So it's very nicely implemented in that.
And even after that, you can choose for yourself if you can try your personal best times there or whatever, or if you want to compete with your friends. You're not missing any sort of extra statue, or it's just you making a challenge for yourself. And I guess that's a whole different topic to discuss about whether games should give, how many challenges the games should give you, and how many should you make for yourself. Yeah. Personally, I do like that the game gives me a lot of challenges and sort of tasks to do for myself, so that I don't have to think about them for myself. But at the same time, if they go too far with that, then I do prefer that. For the most part, it's more important to make an enjoyable gameplay, and then let you have, decide what do I want to do with this, what sort of things I want to do in this game, and how much fun and in which way do I want to have fun in this game.
Yeah, I really want to go back to these difficulty settings, because as I said in the beginning, first half of this discussion, it's about tweaking those numbers behind the scenes. You choose hard difficulty and the enemies get more health, let's say. But what if those are numbers, those are easy enough to put a variable in there, and that just gives makes the numbers different. This is more of a challenge for the game developers, but if you get a little bit different game for what you choose as your difficulty, let's say it's a platformer, and they choose hard, so the game will change itself so that many of the jumps will require special abilities or special skill from the player.
Like precision jumping or...
So essentially that would mean they take some platforms away or change them a little bit according to the difficulty mode you choose. But that's gonna be a pretty hard task for the game developers. But at the same time, I'd really like to see this type of game that doesn't tweak the numbers, but it tweaks the game itself or the environment itself.
Yeah, the environment or the enemies, or the enemy AI. So that's, if you're playing on easy or normal, then let's say there's this skeleton enemy and it's just going to walk forward and throw spears at you. But if you're playing on hard, then when you come next to it and you try to hit it, then it's going to do a dodge or jump backwards or whatever. And some enemies, maybe on normal, they're just, let's say there's a goblin and it's just throwing bombs at you, but when you're playing on hard, then it's a goblin that's also throwing bombs at you, but it also has a shield on it, so you can't just shoot it from afar or whatever. And I think that's more of what I'd personally prefer, that you don't just tweak the health up or damage up or whatever, but that the enemies, you actually have to try some different strategies for the enemies.
Yeah, and I understand it's gonna be difficult, but I think that's the better approach to, if you're gonna give difficulty settings for the players, then maybe this kind of approach is better than having this kind of different versions of the same game. But then you essentially, if you have 3 modes, then you have 3 different games to test. But you have to test it either way. If it's just numbers, you have to test that also. So but I'd really like to see that kind of difficulty in not numbers, but in the mechanics. Maybe it takes away mechanics or puts in some mechanics according to what difficulty you choose for yourself, and essentially for the enemies.
Personally, if I was doing something like that, I would probably design the enemies to be a bit more difficult than I'd like, and then give something like an easy mode where they're not doing that stuff. Like, as I mentioned, dodging your attacks or whatever. If you want to play the game on an easier difficulty, then they're probably not doing that advanced stuff.
Yeah, one other easy way is to put more enemies the harder difficulty you choose, and it could really well fit into this kind of system or mechanic aspect of difficulties.
Actually, that's another thing that I want to mention, in that some games do this, that they, if you're playing on a harder difficulty, then you're getting more resources or more money, or there are more enemies in there. And what that results in is that you're not only do you have more enemies to deal with, but maybe they're not all that more difficult, so you're actually getting more experience points, or once again more money or more resources from them. So the game actually becomes easier if you play it on a harder difficulty, because you're getting more resources, and now you can put those resources into leveling up your characters or your items. And in that sense, it's sort of counterintuitive.
What if you tied it to, there's this enemy group, and in easy this enemy group consists of one enemy, and if you defeat that enemy group with one enemy, then it gives you something. But when you choose a hard difficulty, that one enemy group is actually consists of, let's say, 6 enemies, but you have to defeat all those 6 and you get the same reward, same amount of reward, but for more enemies to defeat.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say what would be the ideal thing there, but as I mentioned in the start of this discussion about the Diablo 3, in that you can almost infinitely like choose how hard you want the game to be. Even in that game, you do get more money and better loot by choosing the harder difficulties.
That's actually also very good or important aspect. If you choose to go harder difficulty setting, then you are expecting more rewards also. So you have to really balance that too, that you player really feels they are be rewarded for working harder, choosing the harder option.
Yeah, and also ideally, like, it would be great if everybody just understood, or all the players just understood that it's more satisfying to play the game if it's within this zone where it's not too difficult, but it's something that I can learn and I can manage with, and I'm having fun with it because of that. And of course, we've been talking about difficulty settings and means of like making difficulties. But one thing that I also think is pretty important in this discussion is that when it comes into the implementation of difficulty is like length of these difficult things. Because for me, it's very often like a big no-no if some challenge is very long and it's very unforgiving. Like, let's say you have to do 5 minutes of something and you can't make a single mistake. That's really bad for you. If it's a boss fight that requires that I don't take any damage, and that boss fight is maybe like 30 seconds or a minute, I think that's completely fine.
But if that boss has 3 phases that each take 5 minutes to clear, and you, for all those 3 stages, you have to take not a single hit. Not a compartmentalized between those phases, but all throughout the 3 phases. Then it starts to... And many games, especially RPGs, have this kind of epic last boss. That, and if there's this kind of challenge tied to it, I always call bullshit on it, because it's really just... But yeah, I understand that it's really tied to how much time you have to invest. And the shorter it is, usually short is sweeter than big long fight, where you just you battle 5 minutes and you took 1 hit. You have to start all over right away.
And of course, like, if that's something that you like, then sure, fine, whatever, go through with it. But ideally, I don't think, or I don't like it when the game sort of imposes that challenge to me if I want to 100% the game. I think that's something that, well, of course, like, speedrunning is a thing, and very few games, for the most part, like, by themselves encourage like a complete speedruns. That's something that, you know, or basically there's some community in the internet that sort of keeps up with everything, and you can go there and you can compete with other people sort of in that environment. But if the game is throwing that stuff at you, then that feels like a turn off for me. So in that same sense, if there's some like 15-minute long battle and you want to challenge yourself, I'm not going to take any challenge, and I'm going to record this video and put it on YouTube or on some website, and I'm going to get a lot of clout for that, then that's completely fine. That's great. And I'd love to watch that. But if the game itself is saying that, there's this percentage number here and it's never going to be 100% until you finish this one incredibly hard task, then no thanks.
But once again, there are different games for different kinds of people also. But I think, and I agree that there can be this golden road, we say. It's this middle road that takes the best parts of the the challenge and doesn't start going to the bullshit route with those challenges.
Yeah.
And if you are enthusiastic about the game, then you, as you said, you find those people who want to challenge themselves, and you can, or challenge yourself with something. And nowadays we have these social medias where you can boast about your achievements freely, even without the game giving you those challenges.
Yeah, and we've been talking about this long, but we haven't actually mentioned that the new game pluses at all. So of course that's one way of implementing difficulty. Of course, once again, I guess it's more or less the same as just making a harder difficulty, but now it's locked behind the fact that you have to play the game through once at least. And I don't really know if that's necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, I think if you're a very experienced player, why do you have to play the normal difficulty first? Why can't you just go on and choose the hardest one in the first place? One could argue that it's about kind of protecting that majority of the gamers who might accidentally want to go with the hard difficulty, and they are then crying that this is too hard, but you can start the game over. If it's a good game, it immediately tells you with the gameplay and the enemies that come at you how hard it's gonna be with that difficulty you choose, so you can go and change it. And nowadays many games you can do it just in the menu and not having to start game over, game all over.
Yeah, and exactly what you mentioned, I think those are always the better options, that either the game is going to warn you that you're about to play the game on hard and you should be pretty, or are you really sure you're going to do that, or it's going to let you change the difficulty even in the game if you feel like it's getting too difficult for you. Because as this is becoming a problem, especially with the fact that if you, let's say something happens to your PC or your gaming system or whatever, and your save file is gone, and now you want to restart the game, or you rebuy the game or reinstall the game or whatever, you play it on a new system, and now you can't play the harder version because the game requires that you beat the normal version. And it's especially troublesome, I think, with games like the Legend of Zelda games, because those are pretty long games for the most part. So you can't just, if we think about, say, the first Super Mario Brothers game, that game has a new game plus. If you play the game through the first time, then the game restarts from the start, but now the game is more difficult. All the Goombas are turned into these enemies that have a shell on them. I can't remember the name of them, but you can no longer just stomp on the Goombas. Now you can stomp on them, but now they turned into these shells and you just can't get rid of them permanently. And so, but Super Mario Brothers, it's not that long of a game, to play through. But Legend of Zelda games, for the most part, you have to put anywhere from 20 plus hours unless you're some sort of speedrunner to getting there. So in that sense, I don't really like the fact that, hard mode or New Game Plus or anything is locked behind there.
Yeah, game developers should really look their game critically and think about how long the game is gonna be and take these things into consideration when they decide what kind of difficulty system they're gonna work into them, because not the same one system can't fit all the types of games. You have to choose the optimal way to implement difficulties. Some games it's straight up normal or hard, and some games it's the automatic way. Some games it's something from the both of the worlds. I really wanted to get back to this inclusivity part of difficulty settings, because I think it's best to ask the players only questions that they really know how to answer them. What is your name? Everyone can answer that. What is your impairment? They know what their impairment is. They can see, they can distinguish red and green from themselves.
Yeah.
Or they have a hard hearing, or they can't hear as well as regular people do. Those are things person knows they have, or they know how to answer to them. But if they are thrown this, do you want easy or hard, then it's more abstract, and you are having harder time to choose between those. Well, you can, we already mentioned this, you can make the difficulty setting look like the other one is you want to experience the story and you want to experience the gameplay. That's already a bit better. But I think I just trying to imagine this ideal combination of difficulty settings or modes, and it would be that all the questions or all the settings are all about a person's abilities or defects. Let's say how much volume you need and how much hearing aids or visual aids you want for your sounds. And how do you want the colors to look? There's usually some kind of color or gamma setting. These kind of things that you really know when you try them out. This works for me. I can choose this, and that's what you can ask from your player. And all the other stuff should be more of the automatic background intelligence doing the job for the player. They scale up the difficulty according to their skills and give out these challenges, or use this old Super Mario ideology of it's easy to clear or easy to play through but hard to master. So the game itself is this easy to clear, but it has these branches or these aspects that need more skill to attain. And then maybe have in the background this kind of adjusting intelligence or some kind of system that adjusts some. I can't pinpoint which ones it should be, but let's say it nerfs the enemies if you are starting to get poor or you're performing poorly against them, let's say like this. So this kind of combination of stuff, the combination of different aspects of this difficulty. And the main point is about this, asking the player only the stuff they can answer confidently. And the other parts are decided by the game. But that's a very challenging combination to make right. And if you screw it up, people are gonna notice it, and it might even deter the game or make the game a lot worse because of that. So it's a very hard road to go through, but if someone succeeds with that kind of combination, I'd really like to see that.
For me personally, I don't want any hidden tweaking, to be fair. I think the game, it needs to establish that whether it's a hard or not so hard game from the start. And that should be like if you're looking at reviews or whatever from the game, then you can see that, okay, this is a hard game. And there's no getting around that. I think the best game isn't really about giving you the choice of, choosing the difficulty, because once again, like, that's something I have personal experience with, that I had a time in my life when I thought that I was pretty bad at games, and I kept choosing the easy difficulty on all the games. And there were a lot of games that I didn't really enjoy as much as I did enjoy later when I tried those games on normal or even hard difficulties. And even though it felt to me like, there's this easy setting, and I think that it says that, okay, this is for those who want to experience the story, then I felt like, yeah, this is for me. That's what I thought, but it wasn't the actual truth. So I think games with the best difficulty is actually about making sure that the game is something where you can learn the game well enough. So if you want to make a right difficulty setting, then don't make a difficulty setting at all. Make sure that you can teach the player in some way how to play the game, and or if they can't really do well, then make sure, is it about disabilities, or is it about them just not having learned or understood something in the game at that point. And if it's about disabilities, then let there be something that they can do to overcome those disabilities, whether it's a setting or something that they can just buy to upgrade their character. And if it's about learning, then make sure that there are all the ways to learn everything the player needs to make it through the game. And for the most part, I think that it's important that the challenges that the game offers by itself, they should always be somewhat attainable, and then keep those challenges that are really, really hard, then those should be within communities, I think.
Yeah, you're tying this up pretty neatly to what I really want to, or what I was thinking also, that when you're making a game, difficulty setting is something you should not think about at all. Don't worry about it. Start making the game and make it, well, you can make it for yourself. Make it for your or for your skill level.
Yeah.
Make it something you enjoy and find that satisfying gameplay loop that keeps you engaged and that keeps your test groups engaged, because you really need to test that game with someone, and if they are engaged with the game, then you are on the right track.
Yeah.
And those difficulty settings, those are just something that they are kind of artificial in the end, having those, when you can just have this very satisfying gameplay loop that teaches the player just the right amount and challenges them just the right amount to overcome their challenges or their problems with finding or understanding what they need to do to succeed or go further in the game. And when they get that, when something clicks and they make that extra step, it's very rewarding. So if you manage to make a game like that, it means you don't really need to have any difficulty settings at all.
Yeah.
And if there are any settings, it's gonna be about catering or helping those those who might have disabilities and really want to enjoy your game. Yeah. Like having some color adjusting or these hearing aids or text, voiced lines as a text mode or text, readable text. So those should be in these difficulty settings. They're not about difficulty, but those should be the settings people can adjust. And the difficulty and the challenge comes inside your game, and it's challenging the player.
Yeah. And I do think
just enough.
Yeah. And I do think if you notice that if people are playing the game and they're saying that, it's way too easy, then you can tweak the difficulty, make it a little bit more difficult by default, or the entire game or those parts to be more difficult. And if it seems like the game is too difficult, then what is the reason that it's more difficult? Is it because maybe you're doing fine with that stage, and it's because as a developer you know something that the players don't, and in that case it's about how do you transfer that information to the player without actually you being there next to that tester and saying that try this, and then they'll start having no problem. How do you make the player sort of learn that by themselves in that game? That's a big part, because the whole problem with tutorials is always that it's sort of hand-feeding information in a way that you don't necessarily want it. You want to learn the game in some other way, and I think Kirby and the Forgotten Land does that really well. And there are games like the Mortal Kombat, the one that game once again within the last 20 years, the new Mortal Kombat series does that really well. And there are some others that I can't remember right now, but what they do is that they sort of give you this sort of whatever bunch of challenges, and those challenges are actually just disguised tutorials. In a way, they're not named tutorials. They're just try this challenge, and you try it, and it tells you to do something somewhat specific that isn't too hard, and now you're actually learning stuff in the game, and you're getting rewarded for doing that challenge. So it's not just a challenge, but it's also something that teaches you something specific, and you do those and you actually learn or become better in the game. You learn new things. So that's really what I'm hoping. And if you have to have difficulty settings, this is something that I've never seen anybody do. If you've seen this somewhere, then please let us know, leave a comment. But what I'd like to see is that the game lets you play the game for a little while, and only then lets you choose the difficulty. And in that case, it's even fine if you can, of course, there are some games that let you choose the difficulty and then change it later. I guess that sort of goes with this lie as well. But I've never seen anyone do specifically the fact that they'd let you play the game and then they ask you, was that too hard or too easy? Yeah. So I guess I was about to say that I'd like to see that, but at the same time, once again, it is something that breaks the immersion a little bit. So it would be even better if you don't have to actually make that decision, but the game itself is actually just...
Yeah, but there might be a very clever solution to that, having it somewhat in the games world somehow.
Yeah.
But I'd really like to see a solution like that. Will it work? Is it a good? Is there a place for difficulty settings as we usually know them? Easy, normal, hard? Or should it be more like we are really want game development be about making this satisfying gameplay loop that teaches the player and challenges the player and is tested so that you get inside the player's head and know what needs to be done inside the game itself in that gameplay sessions that encourages players to overcome the challenges and not think about the gameplay being too hard, but thinking that there's something I'm missing and I'm gonna go look for it.
Like it's hard, but I'm having fun. And if you can't make the player have that sort of feeling or whatever, then I think you do need to improve the gameplay in some way. And of course, players are different in that. Sometimes you're just having a bad day or whatever, so not always you're going to have that, but still. That would be the ideal scenario, and hopefully that would be what every game developer strives with their games. And it's not just, I'm just making the game and it just has to be what it is, and I'm just going to put a difficulty setting there because I just can't bother coming up with making my game any better. So that would be our ideal scenario for making a game difficulty setting.
I think we had a nice discussion right now.
Yeah.
It was good. Maybe you got something out of it. I at least got something out of it. These discussions are always very nice because they make me realize new things when throwing ideas at you and you throw ideas at me and maybe you throw ideas at us too and we throw ideas at you too.
I'm Geralf and this is Vaendil and we are the Owl Basket. Thank you for watching.
Thanks. See you next time.
Bye bye.